And hello, everyone. I am John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And this morning, my title is A Hung and Pransome Yintz. Well, what's that? That's a spoonerism. That's where you take different words and parts and switch them around. And some people have made some pretty funny uh, things with these spoonerisms. This one is occurred to me because I was trying to think of some way to refer to the Yintz, that we can't really refer to. Now, by Yintz, I refer to first the escort of Queen Elizabeth, her husband, that Yintz, and then the other Yintz was his son, her son, uh, Yintz, um, Charles, and then um, now we have a couple of more Yintzes to deal with, but we also have a new Ying to deal with. So it's all part of the historic development of uh, of history, and it's brought us to this point. I want to play. I'm sorry if this causes any trouble for Facebook. They usually will, if it's an audio, block it or something. But I'm going to play this anyway, just because it's very cheerful and lots of fun. I was going to read it myself, but I think I'm just not going to try it. This is quite a bit of tricky elocution and precise diction that makes it very, very funny. Let me get it back on the. Where is it? There we go. And this is the story of Beeping Slooty and the Hung and Pransome Yintz. A comic routine from the 50s that I think still works. Okay. Now we've been working really hard. A lot of people have been really working hard to dig into the current status of our healthcare system as regards certain therapeutic measures involving an alleged pandemic. And I wanted to follow up on what Mark Kulak has been opining. And of course, he hasn't made any final conclusions yet, but he did mention it is his opinion at this point that we're looking at a bioweapon intentionally released. Now, that's just his opinion, but I think it's pretty darn well documented at his sites, Housatonic Live, and his website, HousatonicITS.com. So, check into his work for background of that opinion. But I would like to just add back into the mix just some things that I've myself have noticed, and the most important one is the connection between the Yintzes and coronavirus. And that goes through Boris Johnson. And let's start with this picture. Let's see. Okay. The Virus, a Thriller by Stanley Johnson. Okay. Dr. Lowell Kaplan, head of the Bureau of Epidemiology at the National Center for Disease Control at Atlanta, Georgia, was on the telephone to Japan. He sounded worried. He was worried. He pushed back a lock of thick graying hair which had fallen over his forehead. and hunched forward as he spoke, the suppressed energy visible in every line of his body. Okay, it differs from A, Brazil, but does it have pandemic potential? That is the question. Well, Dr. Kaplan turns out to be a savior because, well, let's read some of this text over here on. Let me check and make sure you can see this now. Okay, I'm going to put up another page. Stanley Johnson is Boris Johnson's father, okay? And here's a text about the book. Stanley Johnson did write a novel called The Virus. This is dated October 27th of 2020. A post on Instagram claims that Stanley Johnson, father of Prime Minister Boris Johnson, wrote a novel called The Virus in 1982 and includes a synopsis of the book. This is correct. The book was initially published in 1982 and was republished this summer during the coronavirus pandemic. The novel was originally titled The Marburg Virus and loosely draws on a real outbreak of a virus in Marburg, Germany in 1967. The outbreak was associated with laboratory work using African green monkeys imported from Uganda. In Mr. Johnson's novel, The Virus reaches New York. In the preface to the reprint of the novel, Mr. Johnson wrote, quote, "My book's hero, Dr. Lowell Kaplan, a brilliant epidemiologist working with the CDC, has an advantage over those engaged in the current race to find an antidote to the coronavirus." Okay? He knows or thinks he knows the original source of the infection. If he can track down and capture a live green monkey from the very tribe of green monkeys which supplied the Marburg Medical School at the time of the first outbreak, maybe the boffins will be able to develop and manufacture an antidote, unquote. That's Boris Johnson. No, I'm sorry, that's Stanley Johnson writing in the preface to the reprint in 2020. So clearly he's still alive. Now, from there, I want to go to 2012 and I'm going to go over to my Twitter feed and share that with you now. Because it was a couple of days ago, well, on November 26th, a tweeter called What Do I Know posts just a reminder of the opening ritual ceremony of the 2012 Olympic Games, and then shows some pictures. And let's see, I trust you can see these. Okay, so in the upper left, you have a picture of a cell with some points sticking out of it. Kind of, this is 2012 now, right? But if it wasn't blue, if it was red, it would look just like the images that we're seeing constantly of the virus. Okay. Then we have the evil bad guy with the spraying stuff. He's standing up there, and smoke is going around, and the legions of nurses are now dancing and rolling out the beds with the sick children in it. There is some type of a ceremony involving a very large model of a baby. And then there is the one that I used for my cover thumbnail today, this picture of a figure rising out of a hospital bed, much larger than life, and a a mane of gold hair, a pig-like snout, a very wide open mouth, and if you watch the video, you'll see that as he rises out of the bed, he's kind of he's crowing like a rooster. So with his mouth wide open, he's crowing, and perhaps that means that he's pumping out into the atmosphere or something. I don't know. But the gold hair is very much like a helmet. Okay. And I want you to just keep that in mind and look at his outfit. He's wearing a uniform, a red uniform with gold trim, gold lace. Okay. Now that's 2012. So what was the Yintz, who was the host of the ceremony, what was he saying with that ceremony? Well, our hung and Pransome Yintz was saying, hey, there is this thing, this virus thing that is going to happen or could happen. And there's my first question is this simply pre-programming us to when it happens that we won't resist because, oh yeah, that's somewhere in the back of my mind. I knew that there was going to be this virus and this savior was going to rise up and, with a golden helmet or let's say a blonde head of hair that sprays out like a helmet and save us. Okay. And then it somehow it just unfolds that way. Or are they saying to somebody, hey, we can do this. We can release a virus that is going to put everybody in, all the children in bed in hospitals, and we can make it happen if you don't do what we say. A threat, a kind of a Superman villain type of blackmail. I don't know which one it is, but there's something going on there. Okay. Now, also, this is 2012. When does Ebola come out? The next year. Is that a coronavirus? Yeah. Now, the next thing, which was really the one that I just can never get over, is the Asterix comics. Asterix is the French comic. It has been very popular over many, many decades, and children's books, and but also with double ententes in it for adults to get a laugh. And it's a story of Asterix, who is one of the primitive Celtic tribes of France, the Gauls, before the Romans came and conquered them. And it's about a bunch of just silly adventures that the guy has. But they get a new writer about this time, and they publish this Asterix um, yeah, it's a comic book. It's kind of like a magazine form comic book in 2017. And I did a show on it, and in the middle of the show I was doing, and I mentioned about the Yintz, right? And boom, YouTube took it right down in the middle of my show. I never had that happen before. And so I think it's significant that that happened to me. Now let's get to some images from the actual Asterix comic, okay? And once again, I'm going to change my screen share. Okay, now this is just Google. I'm just Googling for Asterix coronavirus, as you can see. And here's the story. Masked villain in French comic Asterix was named coronavirus in 2017. Now, what? What the heck? Why in the world would anybody name a villain in a comic book coronavirus in 2017? Nobody even heard of a coronavirus in 2017, right? But here's what I want you to notice. I want you to notice in the picture here that this charioteer, this coronavirus guy, you know, and look at his arm up there with the Nazi salute, right? It's a Roman salute as well as a Nazi salute, right? Okay. So he's saying, I'm going to race across Italy. I'm going to race across Italy. Now, what else races across a country? A pandemic races across a country, right? So, and coronavirus is a virus. So, how how hard is it to understand that here in 2017, the same thing is happening? And look at this helmet. He's got a gold helmet, just like the guy in 2012. He's got a red outfit with gold trim, just like the guy in 2012. And you can watch the whole comic strip online now. It's all up there. Let's read this text, written by Thibaut Delays, a an illustration from the edition shared by actor Javed Jafari on his Twitter handle shows the masked Auriga, the great coronavirus, being introduced. Auriga is a constellation in the sky that is the charioteer. So it's just the great charioteer, um, with that Roman Latin word thrown in to emphasize Rome. Okay. Here comes our favorite straight from Rome, the champion with MCDLXII victories. Let's see, that's 1757, I think. No, six MCD 14 1462. Okay, somebody's going to know. MCDLXII. I'd have to sit down and write it out to figure it out. But here's the text. The one they call the masked Auriga, the great coronavirus, and his faithful bacillus, it says. The original book was set back in ancient Italy and was released over 2 years before Wuhan reported its first case of the new strain of coronavirus in December 2019. The comic features Asterix and his sidekick Obelix to participate in a chariot race across Italy, organized by Senator Caesar across Italy. They have to contend with a villain named Coronavirus and his sidekick Bacillus. Bacillus is the Latin term for bacteria. It is interesting to note that Coronavirus, the masked villainous chariot racer, eventually failed to win. Meanwhile, while the outbreak is recent, the word coronavirus is not new. The World Health Organization described coronavirus as a large family of viruses that cause illness ranging from the common cold to more severe diseases such as MERS and SARS. The SARS-CoV was identified in the year 2003. Okay, so 1982, Boris Johnson's father writes a novel about a virus that came from green monkeys. And he's this hero that discovers it and saves the world, I trust. I didn't read the book. But is that not the theme of the 2012 Olympics presentation, where you have this Boris Johnson looking character that rises up out of the hospital bed in larger than life form, crowing and spreading out his wings like he's, the coming of some strange godlike figure to fix everything. And everyone dances. And isn't that funny? Because we've had so many dancing nurses and dancing doctors, and we even had a dancing Trump. So, who's calling the tune? Who's really causing all of this? Is it the hung and pransome Yintz? Is Mr. Johnson's father another, Donald Barr type writing science fiction type works to predict the future that they desire for humanity? I.e., the Yintz's famous saying of if he could come back reincarnated, he would like to come back as a virus, a pandemic that would wipe out a huge amount of the population of the world. Why would he want to do that? Well, you know, they're feeling pressure from the crowd, the people. There's just too many of them. They make me nervous. In addition, you have the racist side of it, where, geez, there's just too many Chinese, there's just too many Japanese, too many Asians, too many Slavs, you know, too many Africans, and they reproduce like rabbits, don't they? That whole idea of the masses being these ignorant, filthy, and regrettably alive, useless eaters, very much allied with the thinking that we hear. Now, just looking at uh, all of the frames of here's another one just for fun. So you can see, coronavirus, coronavirus, everybody's yelling it. This is in Italy, right? And it sounds so much like the initial cases that emanated out of the Milan area, and which I think it was George Webb that said that this is consistent with the idea of the vapes, because train stations and places where people could get the vape cartridges along the lines north, south, east, west of the huge train station in Milan, and that city that provides so much textile work. Um, the amount of immigrants there living in probably less than Italian splendor, it indicates that, the idea that a real coronavirus, not just a chariot racing cartoon character, was being contemplated by the people behind this comic book. I can't see it any other way. I'm sorry, especially when we have deep research from Mark and others indicating that this does look like an intentional release. Um, yeah, there's just one more thing I wanted to show you. Oops. Google sometimes puts a word in there that you don't want. But now who writes a book about Rome? Well, none other than Boris Johnson. The Dream of Rome, 2006. Let's see, are you seeing this? Now let me bring this up so you can see it. All right, this is Wikipedia. Here you go. The Dream of Rome, 2006, is a book by politician, journalist, and former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, in which he discusses how the Roman Empire achieved political and cultural unity in Europe and compares it to what he argues is the failure of the European Union to do the same. It was aired as a BBC television documentary prior to its release as a book. And there he is, dreaming about Rome. I just wanted to go to this review, which I haven't seen, but it's a paywall. Tom Holland reviews The Dream of Rome by Boris Johnson. If you do not particularly care a button if you are top or not, as Molesworth once pointed out, it should be easy enough to stop a Latin teacher in his tracks. Well, that sounds like some nonsense, but the idea of Rome, being the model for Europe, that's his theme. Well, Rome was an empire. There's nothing democratic about Rome. Nothing. As a matter of fact, most of the people are serfs or slaves. Is that the Europe that Boris Johnson wants? Apparently so. And if someone were to give him a gold crown on his head, to say, hey, Boris, save us from this plague, he'd feel like that was his destiny in life. That's what I was brought up to be. I am the savior. And how will he save us? Well, by ordering us to do what the people behind him want done. He works for the Yintzes. He works for the Yings, the hung and pransome Yintz is now a cold and cuddly Ying. Does that work? Maybe. So basically, you have Boris Johnson. Now, let's remember that when he resigned recently, he referred to himself, Boris Johnson, Rome, and Cincinnatus. All right, let's just read this from the Washington Post. Okay, September 6th, 2022. This is 3 months ago. Washington Post. In his final speech, Boris Johnson compared himself to Cincinnatus. Who? Well, if you study American history, you know who Cincinnatus is. That's George Washington's model, the farmer statesman who takes up the sword to save the republic. And then as soon as the war's over, he goes to Annapolis and hands in his sword to the Continental Congress and says, I'm done. I don't want to be an emperor. I'm done, right? Well, Boris Johnson compares himself to Cincinnatus, but let's remember that, well, let's read the story. Like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plow, Boris Johnson said Tuesday from a lectern outside 10 Downing Street. The comparison elicited much confusion on social media, with Google searches for Cincinnatus spiking. Well, a Roman statesman from over 2,500 years ago. So who is Cincinnatus? In the 5th century BC, the Roman Republic was in conflict with the Equi tribe of Italy. Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus was a former Roman consul, a kind of temporary elected leader who had turned to farming after his time in politics. The historian Livy writes that the leaders of Rome approached Cincinnatus and begged him to save the city from invasion. The legend goes that he stopped plowing his field, put on a toga, and returned to the city. He was appointed sole dictator of Rome in 458 BC, a rare position with emergency powers. Hello. And led an effort to save Roman soldiers trapped by the forces of Equi. He defeated the forces of Equi, then gave up power just after just 15 days and returned to his home. The city of Cincinnati in Ohio is indirectly named after Cincinnatus. It's named after the Society of the Cincinnati, formed by officers from the Continental Army to commemorate the war for American independence. And that society is quite active today. And I have actually performed music for them in Washington, D.C. Leaving aside the question of whether Johnson's time at number 10 earned him a spot on the same leadership bench as Washington, Cincinnatus' quote is a supremely bad example for Boris to have chosen. In that 2009 interview, argued Charlotte Higgins, the point of Cincinnatus is not that he's a career politician charming his way around the dinner parties of Rome by night and cutting deals with the great and the good by day. He is a practical man with an honest, backbreaking job outside politics who just gets on with the task in hand with minimum fuss. The statesman's story doesn't end with his victory over the Equi and subsequent resignation. Cincinnatus is said to have returned to Rome in 439 BC when he was asked to serve as dictator for a second time to address concerns that the wealthy Roman Spurius Melius was laying the groundwork to become king by hoarding wheat to secure the support of the plebeians or common people. Well, is Boris Johnson plotting a return? Or the people that control Boris Johnson plotting a return of Boris Johnson? I do think that this empire, reference to the empire as Boris Johnson's ideal world, is real. And I think that his place in the British, government has been engineered, and that his destiny was shaped from childhood by the forces that controlled his father that had him write the book about the Marburg virus, now called simply virus, as either a threat or a promise that look what's coming. Now, I also noticed people replaying on Twitter, as I often am on Twitter, some video of President Obama in 2014, in which he says there's going to be a pandemic. In 2014, there's going to be a pandemic. And then he mentioned in 5 years or 10 years, will we be ready for the next pandemic? And then the person who posted it pointed out, 5 years, 2014, 2019. What happened in 2019? Oh, well, I guess he was right. Oh, he was right. Okay, so this is the same thing. This is the predictive programming or the threat, one or the other. From him, it looks like predictive programming, saying, look what's happening. We know things you don't know, and we're going to need to spend a whole lot of money on therapeutics and vaccines. And PP&E, of course, as it turns out. Cover the world with PP&E. Um, so that gives me a little bit of concern for 2024 because that's 10 years out. And we've also heard Biden say there's going to be another pandemic. So personally, I think this is a wake-up call. Just I want to fold the dates of these incidents from the publication of the book to the publication of the to the 2012 Olympics. How does that fit in with Mark's timeline on remdesivir? How does the timing of the Asterix comic? What can we learn more about that, and who is really behind it? Because I don't think these are simply coincidences. It's just too specific. It's too consistent. I mean, right down to the red uniform and the gold lace on the 2012 Olympics figure, which turns out, of course, to be Boris Johnson because he does have a porcine face. I'm sorry, but he does. And his hair, why do they let his hair be floppy like that all the time? It looks terrible. But to give the impression to people that are on the inside that, yeah, he's wearing that gold crown that we heard about, because which makes me think, that the real money behind all this stuff kind of really stays away from the details, and just, the guy comes up to him and says, do you want me to launch the coronavirus? And he says, well, not today, but maybe tomorrow. Like a mafia guy, just thinking about, what's the best advantage to himself. And the imperial aspect of it, as well as how, the persistence of the British Empire, why do the British people need kings and queens and royalty and all that stuff? Why don't they have a proper written constitution? Why why do they have, a House of Lords? Why do they have lords? Why do you call somebody my lord? It puts them in an elite class way above you, to which you will always be bowing and curtsying and saying yes sir and no sir. Why? Well, this is the bottom line for me about this material, is that, just my opinion, we are living through biological warfare right now. And I think Mark is on the money where we say it's not just one party that's doing it. I'll just open another aspect of the question when we try to sort out, are there different parties? The first thing everybody would like to know is, are there good guys and bad guys, and who's the good guys, right? Well, if you know any good guys, please put them in the comment section, because I'm kind of struggling to find some good guys that are actually prominent and have a audience and have some stature in the government or the medical community. I'm looking. I want to know, really somebody that has the best interest of humanity at heart, that can be a leader. People like Mark, he takes up this incredible challenge, and I my hat's off to him. But I think he's at the tip of it now. I think he's ahead of, the other investigations. I really do. And I also am looking forward to Wednesday night, tomorrow night, when I will be initiating another new trio, and that'll be uh, David Cranmer Underdown with Nick from Twitter. And we're going to dig into the origins of the virus vaccine game that emerges in World War II and thereafter, and try to tie everything together with the incredible research that Nick has been doing over many, many years, and David's incredible ability to tie things together. It's going to be a hot show Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Here at McDuff Lives. But let's go back to World War II for a second and think about the Japanese program, the Unit 731, and how at the end of the war, General Douglas MacArthur is credited, if that's the right word, with making a deal with the Japanese scientists that were working on things like kuru, uh, the brain wasting disease from somewhere in Indonesia, we believe, and other ways to exterminate people, such as what they did to the Chinese people, the rape of Nanking and the dropping of biological warfare on Chinese cities, as the Japanese did in the China-Japanese War in the 30s and 40s. And so we have our military, or at least a part of our military, the Douglas MacArthur side, which, is the real Republican right-wing side of our military, grabbing this potential bioweapon uh, from the Japanese and giving them a pass for the horrific crimes against humanity that they committed during those wars. Why? Why would American military people want that, except for they're anticipating biological warfare coming? And it sounds like it might have been, the best weapon that the Japanese were coming up with, or more than one. But what I think really the essence of that is what turns into prion disease or mad cow disease, from the kuru, Kuru. And, I look into the Navy programs that were going on in the Pacific. Thomas Milton Rivers was part of that. And he, of course, is a Rockefeller medicine man. So they're down there looking for poisons, right? As well as gold and copper and anything that, they can take home and sell. But looking for poisons among the primitive people of Asia and the Pacific area. Okay, so that seems to me to be a different strain entirely from the Nazi strain, which we see coming in through the paperclip program, through Dr. Kurt Blome, or Blome, and the connections to Cold Spring Harbor, the connections to American eugenicists, and the connections to, again, the Rockefellers. Are they all, are the people that are developing Unit 731's biological warfare the same people that are developing the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute biological warfare that had started with Rockefeller money, after World War I? Are these the same, or are they fighting? And here now, I just leave that question on the table while we move forward to, again, Mark Kulak's research indicating that there is competition for running the biological warfare program between certain people associated with DITRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, and BARDA, the biological and something else, BARDA. Okay, I can't remember the acronym, but this is all fleshed out very well by Mark and his programs. So you have this guy, Rick Bright, who basically is with the Ditra type uh, of folks, getting promoted to head BARDA, and then BARDA wants to go along with the remdesivir, and Trump's people somehow say, no, you got to get rid of Rick Bright. So he fires Cadillac, fires Rick Bright, but there's still this distinction that Mark has been drawing very clearly between the group of scientists that was pushing for remdesivir and the rest of them. And that issue that he's been really doggedly digging into is so important, because what is remdesivir? Why is it again and again and again looked to as a therapeutic when again and again and again it doesn't work according to tests, according to actual experience? Why? Well, that sounds like somebody's idea of that's my weapon. That's how I'm going to conquer the world. And there's a competing way. But does it really boil down to the Army and MacArthur's program, through the Pentagon, versus the DARPA program through CIA and State Department and other influences, Justice Department? Not as to one's a good guy and one's a bad guy, but which one's program of population reduction is going to be adopted. Because that's how people sort the winners from the losers. Is if my program goes, then I get huge amounts of funding. If you know that there's an enemy out there trying to take over everything by use of any means necessary, then you're facing an empire like the Roman Empire, an empire like the British Empire, an empire that won't stop at anything because, as Lord Palmerston famously said, Britain does not have friends, it only has interests. And, it's very interested in resources around the world. Now, is Britain simply just the current front for a larger something behind the scenes that's the real consolidating factor that's drawing everything into the same pile of money, i.e. BlackRock and Vanguard and all the corporate wealth of the oil companies, etc.? Is all that really what the nobility is fronting for at this point? Certainly what Churchill was fronting for during his career. But I think it's something that we need to realize, is that there may not be any good guys in this fight. It could just be that this gang has found their poison that they're going to use to achieve the goals of the real planners of the world, the ones that want to either reduce population or genetically alter us to suit their needs, creating an orc farm perhaps, or a bunch of zombies for their amusement, or perhaps just willing slaves by tweaking our genetics, making us happy slaves, or are they just out to kill us? But it looks to me like both sides are convinced that there's just too many people on the planet. And that's wrong. That's false. There's plenty of room. There's just the desire to control, the desire to own everything, and the desire to eliminate any possibility that you might ever be dethroned. That's what empires do. And that's what I think, in some way, whether they all ultimately are just competing for the same throne, or whether there's two different or four different factors going on here where, the Koch brothers may be on one side and Soros on another side. I don't know. But that's, the layers that we have to pull back. But my show today is really just to say, look at the images that they give us. A lot of people look at The Simpsons, for instance, for that, or just generally at commercials or various other ways that you see these things. Well, I happen to have run across the coronavirus Asterix comic a couple of years ago, and just tried to talk about it. But the YouTube people would not put up with it at all and just struck the show. I've got the stub of that show somewhere, but along with everything else on my first channel, YouTube took it down, of course. Well, a lot of good thoughts in the chat room there. I think I will leave it with you guys, but that was my show for today. Thanks for your attention. And remember, we now have that podcast called McDuff Lives with the exclamation point podcast. Just Google it or look for it on whatever podcast service you prefer, such as Spotify or Google or others. And hope you enjoy it. Marcia is putting a lot of time into producing it, and I think it sounds great. So, enough said. I will see you guys tomorrow night with the new trio with Nick and David Cranmer Underdown.